What do you think? Let's just get this week's block started. Look, my hairdo has nothing to do with this week's block. This week, we are making the third block in a series of what I'm calling filler blocks. These are blocks you can customize to various sizes that will fill in the gaps between other blocks that are of different sizes. A rumor has it that this technique was used by Seminole Native Americans, hence the name. It makes for a great inner border or decorative sashing because it gives a little extra something something, and it is easy to customize to fit your needs on a quilt. I'm going to show you two different ways to construct this block, and there's probably more, but I will just show you two. You choose the method that you are most comfortable with. With that said, let's get this block started. First things first, I need some elixir juice. Okay, it's just coffee because I need to wake up a little bit. For the sake of simplicity and because these are what I have on hand, I'm going to use 2.5-inch squares and 2.5 by 4.5-inch strips. Now again, you could use a 1.5-inch square, you could use 3-inch squares, and this is one of those things where you're going to customize it to make it fit what you need. So to make this block, it's fairly simple. You're going to take a 2.5-inch square and you're going to take your 2.5-inch wide rectangle and you're going to sew them on both sides of those squares. And so you're just going to make a whole bunch of these. So let's get sewing. Okay, so I got all my pieces sewn together, and in terms of the seam allowance, I actually pressed it in towards that center square. Now you can choose to press it outward or inward, but whatever you decide, keep it consistent among all of these separate pieces, because if you alternate it, your seam allowance, or in terms of nesting the blocks together, it won't work. Trust me, I've tried that. Okay. Now, to assemble this block, you're going to be doing it, shall we say, diagonally. Here's what I mean by that. We're going to be putting these blocks together, or these pieces together, I should say. The point that we're going to line up is actually this bottom left corner to this top right corner, so that when you sew them together, it's actually here, or those two seams are what's going to nest together. Okay. And you're going to continue to do that. So on this next piece here, we're going to put the top right piece of this red fabric and line it up with the bottom left piece of this yellow here. And so eventually what you're going to do is you're going to just have this effect where you'll have this all sort of stitched diagonally. So let's start putting this block together. Take these two pieces, and I'm going to nest that seam right there. You can put a pin in it if you want to. Now I'm not starting here at the very top of the fabric because, well, you notice on the bottom here, the bottom fabric doesn't go all the way up to the very top edge. So I'm just going to start a little bit off right about here. And as long as I'm off of that bottom fabric, I should be okay. So then here at the bottom, notice that the top fabric ends at this point. So once I go past that top fabric, I can sew off and start sewing my next piece. Now at this point you could choose to press your seam allowances open, or you can just choose to press it to one side. For now I'm just going to finger press it over to the left, and I'll finger press this one to the left. And we still got one more piece to sew on, so let's get that one sewn on. I'm gonna finger press towards the left again. Now, lining it up, we're gonna match this bottom point to this top point here. And let's finger press toward the left again. We had it like this, and then we kind of sewed it in almost like a stair-step fashion, making sure that our top left corner, in terms of that seam, nests with the bottom left corner of the next square. So now let's take this to the iron and let's get this all pressed out and flat. Okay, so we got this all pressed, and again I pressed all the seam allowances towards the left. You can do it towards the right if you want to. That choice is yours, or if you want to, you could take the time and actually press your seam allowances open. Now here's where the magic kind of comes. Now I'm gonna take my ruler. From each of the tips of these squares, here, 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 as well as there and there, I'm gonna take a ruler, and this is where I'm gonna either measure, I could do a measurement that is 1/4 inch away from that point. I could do a measurement that is, let's see, 1 inch away from that point, from each of those points. I could put my 1 inch line, or in this case, the 1.5 inch line. Okay, so this is where you can kind of customize the width of the block. Basically, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be cutting or trimming off all of this excess fabric here. How much you want to cut off, well, that'll depend upon what size width block that you need. Again, I could choose to go 1/4 inch away, in which then I'm going to take my ruler, and on each of these points here, I'm going to make sure that the point or the top of that square is right there on the 1/4 inch line. Or if I don't want to make an exact 1/4 inch, I could choose to what is called float the block, in which then here I'm going to measure 1 inch away, and on each of the points I'm going to make sure that the point is right there on the 1 inch line. The benefit of that is you don't have to match up the points here, or you don't have to worry about losing your points right here at the top. First and foremost, I'm actually going to get a larger ruler so I can do this a little bit more easily. Again, on this entire piece here, I'm making sure that each of the tops are on that 1 inch line. Whoops, that one's off a little bit. The bottom, or this block, is kind of a little bit off there, so is this one, but I'm not going to worry about it. And in fact, in the overall quilt, you're not going to notice that, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. Here we go, we'll trim all of this excess off. Whoops, I'm off the cutting mat, so let's shift it down a little bit. Okay. Then I'll shift it down, trim off this small piece here. Turn it around, we'll do the same thing. So, and making sure that all of the tops there are on that 1 inch mark line. I'll trim all that off. Okay, so now you have this rather a little bit of an odd shaped looking block because of the fact that, well, these edges here are at a 45-degree angle. There's two things in which you could actually do to help you sort of like round out or square up those sides. Now you could actually cut, in this case, what I did here was I put that angled edge on the 45-degree line here on my cutting mat. And what I could do then is, if I make a 5.5-inch square, cut it on the diagonal, and then sew the diagonal piece onto this angled edge here, that'll kind of square up the edge. But I'm not going to do that. I'm actually just going to do this, I'm just going to line up my ruler here, and I'm just going to whack off this edge there. Do the same thing to the other side. Whack off that edge there. Just like that. Yep, I squared off the edges there. The one thing I like about this particular technique is that it's very quick, it's very fast, and you could make it as long as you want or as short and narrow as you want. Again, it's a customizable technique. Some people will argue that in order to get a certain width, you have to actually measure it from the center. So say, for example, if I wanted a 4.5-inch wide, then from that center where all of these points meet up, you'll take, well, 4.5, divide that by 2, that's 2.25. So you'll take your 2.25-inch line on your ruler, put that right there, and make sure that those points are on the 2.25-inch line, then trim off your sides. That's one way of measuring it, but I just chose to measure from this point outward. If you feel more comfortable with measuring from that center point outward, again, it's better to do it that way if you need a certain width on this block. I'm probably going to be trimming this block down even further once we get the whole quilt made. So I'm just choosing to straighten it up straighten the edges up, and let's just be done with it. Now, the one thing that I do not like about this technique is you're on the bias here. The edges here, I mean, they're really stretchy. Because we cut the fabric here at a 45-degree angle, you're not on grain. You're what we call off grain or on the bias. And when that happens, then your edges, well, they can sort of distort. They can get misshapen. You know, they can stretch. So you might start off with a block that is maybe, 7 inches, but by the time you actually get it sewn into the quilt, it could have stretched out to about 8 inches. Yeah, I've had that done too. Part of the reason why I actually went 1 inch from the top here is because I know it's gonna stretch over time. So eventually, by the time I get it into the quilt, I might need to trim it down even further. So just something to think about. That's technique number 1. Let's get to technique number 2. In technique number 2, I'm still using these 2.5-inch squares. Now these 2.5-inch squares, again, they'll be what I'm calling the center diamonds. Now, in terms of the background fabric, well, that's gonna be a little bit different. I'm using squares here. Now these squares are 5 inches big. The size of square that you're gonna need as for your background will depend upon the size of your inner diamonds. Whatever size your inner diamonds are going to be, multiply it by 2, and that's the size square that you need. Since I'm using 2.5-inch squares as my center diamonds, multiply that by 2, henceforth I got a 5-inch background square. If you're using a 1.5-inch square for your center diamonds, then you'll multiply that by 2 and you'll get a 3-inch square. So again, whatever size square that you're going to be using as your center diamond, multiply it by 2, and that's the size background square that you're going to need. With each of your background squares, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be cutting it diagonally both ways. And so from each square, you're going to get 4 triangles. And well, if you know the term inset triangle, that's basically what you're going to be making here. There's one cut diagonally. I'll turn this around, or actually I should have just moved the ruler. But in this case, I already shifted the fabric, and I'm going to cut it diagonally again from corner to corner. And there I got my 4 triangles. Then with each of these triangles, we're going to sew it again to both sides of our 2.5 inch center diamond or 2.5 inch square. How we line this up is I'm going to line up the tip of the triangle to the bottom of our 2.5 inch square, or our center diamond in this case. Sewing triangles on both sides, and we're just gonna keep doing for all of the blocks. So let me cut the rest of these background squares and get my inset triangles, and let's get this block sewn together. So we got all of our units sewn, and again, just to repeat, I sewed a triangle to each side of the 2.5 inch square, or that center diamond, as I've been calling it. And again, when you line up your triangles, you want to take the bottom edge, or the tip of the triangle, the top point of the triangle, line it up to the bottom edge of your 2.5 inch square. Then in this case, I pressed all of the seam allowances outwards towards those triangles. You can press them in towards the center square if you need to, or you can press your seam allowances open. However you press your seam allowances, it's going to be your choice. But if you are going to press it, press to one direction, keep it consistent. So if you press your seam allowances towards the outer triangles, do it for all of them so that your seams will nest when you start sewing the pieces together. Now, just like with technique number 1, you're going to line up, or you're going to be putting this sort of diagonally, and you're going to line up. Oh, wait a minute. Is this right? Something doesn't quite look right. Oh, I know what it is. I think these ponytails are affecting me, so yeah, that's much better. Here's the error that I made. Don't do this, okay? So originally I said that you're gonna be sewing your triangles all in the same direction. But when you start assembling the block, again, matching the points, or the top point to the bottom point of the next block, you're gonna get a big gaping hole. And that's not pretty. How you sew it together is you'll take your triangle. When you sew it to the center square, you're going to sew it so that it goes in opposite directions. So if I do, for example, in this case, I have the left triangle here pointing downward, then on all of the, when I sew all the pieces together, the left side of the left triangle is all going to face downward. Then the right side is going to point upward on all of the units. So let's get these blocks corrected, and let's get them correctly sewn. So now we got our pieces all sewn together, and again, I pressed the seam allowances out towards the triangles on all of these. Again, you can press them in towards that center square, or you can press your seam allowances open. However you do it, just keep it consistent so that your seams will nest when you start sewing these pieces together. To sew these units together and to start making the block, let's turn it this way, or sideways, I should say. I'm going to point all the top triangles going towards the left. All the bottom triangles are going to go towards the right. Why I'm doing this is about to make sense, because assembling the block, yeah, it can get a little bit confusing. So we're gonna still assemble the block on the 45 diagonal here, where we're gonna take this top left point on the second unit, we're gonna match it to the bottom right point of the first unit. So it's gonna go together like that. Then this next unit, we're again taking the top left point, matching it to the bottom right point of the previous unit. That'll go together like that. And so forth. So we'll take, so that our unit, when it's all sewn together, it should look something like this. Now, if you do it so that it was your top triangle pointed to the right and then your bottom triangle pointed to the left, then you're gonna take your top right corner here and you'll match it up to the bottom left corner here. So it'll go something like this. Now I cannot sew it like that because, well, look what happens. I got a big hole right here. So I do have to sew this in a certain way. Once you find out which direction your triangles are supposed to point and which corners, which top corner or bottom corner you're supposed to match, it's going to be pretty simple to actually figure out how to put this block together. I'm going to put that one there. Let's rearrange my colors here for a second. Okay, and let's get this block sewn. So I got all the pieces all sewn together, and this is what it has, or this is what it looks like as of right now. Now, just like with technique number 1, I do have these angled here at the top and the left and the right here. Now, in technique number 1, what you saw me do was just line up my ruler. Oops, let's do this side. Line up my ruler there and just cut the edge off here just to straighten out the block. But with this technique, I'm gonna do it using another background square. So this, again, this square is 5 inches, in which I'm gonna cut it in half on the diagonal. Since I have an extra square, I'm just gonna cut this in half on the diagonal. And now, this triangle should be big enough so that I could actually sew it on there, and just to kind of square up or clean up the edge there. So one here, and we'll sew the other one to the opposite side. Okay, so when I line up the triangle, I'm just going to line up one edge of that triangle toward the edge of the block. When I line it up again, this is the, when I cut the original square, cut it in half, this is that diagonal cut that I did. I'm gonna match that up to the angle here from the block, put it right sides together, and I'm also gonna make sure that the fabric edges here are kind of lining up. They don't have to be perfect. Okay, so we got both of the triangles sewn on. Now we're going to press the seam allowances toward the triangles, and we're going to start trimming down our block to make it all nice and neat. We have our block nicely pressed, and just like in the first technique, we will need to trim it down much in the same way. You could either measure from the center of the diamonds or measure from the tip of those diamonds to the edge. On this particular unit, I measured from the center of the diamonds outward. Unlike the first technique, you do not have much room at the tips of the diamonds, which means you could potentially lose your points if you're not mindful of your seam allowance. So take note of that when choosing which method you decide on. And here is my Seminole block. Now, I'm not going to give you final sizes of these blocks because, well, you're going to be customizing it to fit your quilt. Now, some other ways that I've seen people use these blocks is they might use this as like a inner border or as a decorative sashing. Just be creative with it because there's more than one use for it. I'm just using it as a filler block to fill in those empty spaces a little bit more decoratively. You know, when I look at this in the camera, kind of looks like a plaid or like a cardigan, huh? Well, that's it for this video. I hope you give this Seminole block a try. It's a great technique to add a little special something to your quilt. If you want to do it as a border treatment or maybe even as a sashing, hey, it's a good way to just jazz up your quilt. Now, as always, go out and create something. Oh boy, it's hot. It's hot. It's hot, hot, hot. Whenever I tie my hair like this, yeah, it's time for a haircut. Where you're gonna be making it to a different side. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications on when I upload the next video. Put a comment down below saying what you liked or maybe even what you didn't like. And join the Facebook discussion group at Treasure Heart Creations. You can post pictures of the blocks that you created or just scroll through and gather inspiration from other Treasure Heart Creation Group members. And from time to time, there are giveaways exclusively for Treasure Heart Creation Group members. So use the link in the description box below to sign up. If you're on Instagram, post pictures of the blocks that you're working on using the hashtag THC5252. Well, that's it for now. Now go out and create something.